Hello, Story Seekers. I'm Nico.
I'm Ben, and you're listening to The Tiny Bookcase.
Our guest for this episode has embarked on an ambitious journey to write a short story every day for the whole year.
Based in Brooklyn, he's a former restaurant critic, journalist, and playwright who's written for film, television, podcasts, video games, and awards shows. We would like to warmly welcome Timothy Cooper.
Hello, Timothy.
Thank you so much for having me. You guys are awesome, and I'm so excited because I got to write some fiction for you guys, and usually I'm a screenwriter, and so it's really exciting to embark on both your podcast and this project that led me to your podcast in the first place.
I mean, every day is a lot. This is going to sound silly, but that's a lot of days every day.
You know, you're not wrong. It is a lot. And now I should mention that if you go to the website, which is, I'm sure we'll plug later, but it's 365shortstories.com. There are 100 words each, so they're drabbles. You call them microfiction, you call them drabbles. People have different names for it. But that is still a lot because each one has to be a unique idea. Yeah. So in some ways, writing one story or one novel or novella that was 36,500 words would have been easy, a lot easier in some ways.
Yeah,
I can fully appreciate that. I mean, we've been writing to a much larger word count for a long time now, 800 to 1,500 words. That's what we typically aim for, and that is still hard. And so writing, getting a whole story across in 100 words. That's pretty fucking difficult as far as I'm concerned. So,
yeah, but it's I like something I like about screenwriting is the limitations. You have to hit a certain page count and not much more, not much less, or people will think this person doesn't know what they're doing, or they think they're self-important, or whatever, or they can't write efficiently. And same with structure and everything. And this is kind of an extension of that, where you have to write within a certain number count, and not to spoil my own story, and I won't yet, but you had mentioned to me that the upper limit generally is 1,500 words, so I did exactly 1,500 words, no more, no less, because I guess I'm very comfortable in that space of being like, please give me a limitation.
I think it's actually a first for us to have a screenwriter on. Is that?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
I think
so.
I think.
Well, I'm honored.
Yeah, I think we might have had people that have potentially written screenplays before, but definitely not as the main thing. So it's really interesting that you latched onto that 1,500. You're just like, I'm going to write exactly this. That's fascinating.
It's interesting because we've had people on actually who've written the novel adaptations of movies. So we're gradually pushing our way into
the film space. Yeah.
So I've got a little warm-up question for you. What's the just mentioning in the intro that you have also worked as a restaurant critic in the past. What's the best place you've ever eaten?
Did you say the best meal or the best plate?
Ooh. Either.
Well, I have to say my girlfriend's cooking. She's an amazing cook. And sometimes my highest compliment that I pay her often is, I would pay money for this. The good news is I'm not paying money for it, but I would pay money for it.
Only about the food,
right? We're talking about the food. We're talking about the best dish. That's right. But there's so many. I will say that, we have been, we've been on vacation in Mexico several times, and there are so many. I mean, the food is incredible, and it often brings me close to tears. And there was one specific one that brought me to tears, and she has video that I think she posted of me crying. And it's this the incredible mole at Pujol, which is has been documented on Netflix shows and stuff like that. So I'd heard all about it, so the expectations were high, which generally makes a dish not as good. Yeah. But in this case, it exceeded even the high expectations I already had. It's this mole that the chef has never stopped cooking. It's been continually being heated and refreshed, where it was never completely emptied, for something like a decade now. Oh, God. And they actually tell you on the menu which day number it is of the mole. And wow. I will say that when I tasted it, I burst into tears because I was just thinking of it brought out all the history of and resourcefulness and pain and joy of cooking over many, many centuries that this cuisine of Oaxaca and other parts of Mexico evolved. So that is a dish that I will never forget that feeling.
I felt like you got us there. That's fantastic.
That was unbelievably eloquent. Lovely.
Thank you. It's if you can go there and try it, you will not be disappointed.
I would love to. I'd love to.
Well, mole aside, I think it's time for some stories, chaps.
Let's do it.
Our regular listeners will know how it goes, but for those of you joining us for the first time, there'll be 3 stories told in this episode. All of them have been written to the same shared prompt, and this week the prompt is savage. Ben, you're up first.
Savage. Ezra felt the mag train get up to full speed. It pulled him into his plush seat and held him firmly for an instant before the acceleration transformed into momentum. The track, after meandering from station to station inside the domed metropolis of Avalon, had straightened to a mathematically perfect line pointed at their destination, the Dome of Eden. Ezra had peered through his window at each of the previous stops to see his peers boarding the train. Their fresh faces were uniformly tensed into masks of anxiety. For many, it would be their first time travelling to Eden's Dome, and others perhaps their first time leaving Avalon at all. Ezra's cabin remained empty of company, unless he counted his grandmother. The legal matriarch of his family had been asleep since he arrived, and Ezra wondered if she would miss the whole journey. The situation made little sense to him as, despite not seeing him for 10 years, the matriarch had insisted she be the one to accompany him to his oath-giving in Eden. Her word in family matters carried the weight of law. Ezra had not minded. The matriarch was incredibly wealthy and owned a private carriage which had been hitched to the Eden Express for the occasion. He luxuriated in the exclusivity of their accommodations. The large cabin held a suite of smaller rooms, including a bedroom, bathroom, and a long lounge with a bar. Ezra knew the alcohol was untended, but wouldn't dream of breaching the law to sneak a taste. That's what breaking 600 feels like. I don't wake up for anything less than top speed. The old woman had opened her eyes without him noticing, and was scrutinizing him with her small, dark features. Do you want a drink? No, thank you, matriarch. I'm not yet 18. I didn't ask if you could, only if you wanted one. I don't want to break the law, so I don't want one. That's smart. In a very stupid way. I've lost 2 husbands to the law and 1 daughter. Have you ever seen the sentence carried out? I have. There was only one sentence in Dome society: death. Any infraction upon the rule of law condemned one to be put to death, no matter their rank, wealth, or character. Such was the oath. Ezra was surprised his grandmother did not remember the last time they had seen each other, as it had been at her last husband's trial. He had even sat behind her during the resulting execution. They had surgically removed his grandfather's implants first. Those necessary machines, all under oath to the law, were permitted to carry in their flesh. The court surgeon had reduced the old man down to what remained of him without technology. Ezra remembered his sobbing penitence in that moment. Bloody spit had hung from his slack lips, and his blind eyes had searched the grey shapes of the crowd for comfort. He had watched the matriarch remain unmoved by the proceedings, and by the end, when her husband was nothing more than a wounded animal braying for mercy, She had not flinched at the executioner's final blow. A blast of faint taps at the window by his head brought him back to the present. He watched the fine streaks of rain resist the wind and cling to the other side of the glass. After a moment, the rainstorm passed, and Ezra began to see snatches of the land beyond his dome. Those valleys were filled with biogrow farms, but rather than the greenery of the life they surely contained, Ezra saw only the grey of the automated defense systems and the protective fencing which ringed those satellite settlements. "See any savages?" "You can't call them that anymore, matriarch. We call them rejectors now." "Have you met one? No? Then talk less, boy." I hated mag trains when I was your age. Too fast, too dangerous. My mind would conjure fantasies of derailments and collisions whenever we got over 200. I didn't know it then, but what I actually feared was losing control of my surroundings. The patriarch of our family at the time was keen that we should all travel often, supposedly to experience life in the different domes. I wonder now if he was joking, as I have never noticed any difference in the lives people lead within any of them. We are homogenized, uncreative, and oh so safe. With that in mind, I would like to tell you a story about me that you have not heard before. At the time I was due to take my oath, I lived in the Babylon Dome, and my journey to Eden was also to be by the dreaded mag train. Back then, the speeds were just as high as they are now, but everything could be felt more inside the carriages. I barely had time to fret about the train before my worst fears became a reality. The driver did not see the sabotage on the line, and it was only the automated system that engaged the emergency brakes at all, and far too late. 20 carriages, hauling oath-givers and their witnesses, were flung from the track, and we all became bloodied components in the twisted wreckage of the crash. Many died. Then the savages came. I witnessed them pick through the aftermath to steal the children that had survived. As they did so, they killed any accompanying adults they found. Through bleary eyes, I saw a savage drop into our carriage, through what had once been a window, though by that point it was above me. He bashed the remaining life out of my wounded patriarch, and gave a grim smile as he did so, as though taking his life was both an honor and a privilege. My arm had been broken, although I don't remember when that happened, and I squealed when the savage grabbed it to pull me out of the debris. He stopped, and then carefully cleared a space around me before gently lifting me and carrying me from the carriage. Suffice to say, none of us made it on time to our oath-giving. The 40 of us that survived were quickly transported away from the crash site, and were eventually passed from the violent saboteurs, who had engineered our misfortune, to be hidden in the far-flung farming settlements of the savages. There I was cared for by a large family, some of whom were 3 generations removed from life in a dome. They explained to me that the men who had derailed the train had done so in retaliation for the dome's purges, but that I would be safe with them. It took me a long time to believe that. Whilst I lived amongst them, I saw people living without the protection of a dome and without the fear our law begets. They lived simply, freely, and passionately. Everything they did was honest, and as a result their culture felt far richer than my own. I delighted in it. By the time my bone had mended, I was keen to help them sow the seeds for the next season. Why did you come back? I didn't. I was dragged back. After the domes located us and sent in troops to cleanse the village, burning the crops I had helped to nurture. The rehabilitation doctors gave me medication for what they labelled as an anxiety disorder, which they told me I had developed during my captivity. The domes, our technology, everything in our lives that is supposed to keep us safe, had been compromised. The rule of law had been embarrassed, and it wouldn't do for any of us to be seen refusing to take the oath after that. The injections they administered for my condition boxed in my wilder thoughts behind walls of docility. It was a great day for Eden when all 40 of us survivors swore our oaths, apparently. I don't remember it. I don't remember wanting to. I still don't. They are savages because they will not be controlled. But they didn't reject anything. We built a society that rejected them. and in doing so lost a part of ourselves. I told this story to each of my children before they gave their oaths, and I will continue to tell it to your siblings and cousins. My choice was taken from me. If there is any doubt in your heart, any small part of you that snarls when you are told what to do, I recommend you do not go through with it. There is another life for you out there. Well, what will it be?
I loved that, man.
That was really cool.
I'm glad.
That is, for me, immediately in top 5 of stories you've told on this podcast.
Oh, cool.
And I concur. It's a top one I've heard you tell in this podcast as well today. No, that was really cool, and you managed to create a whole world in a very short time, and a whole society and rules, and then flip those on their head, which is really impressive.
I think utopia to dystopia is one of my favorite flips.
Yeah.
It's potentially overdone, but it's so fun to do because there's nothing quite like watching the scales fall from someone's eyes.
Yeah.
Some of it would have been in your performance because your way of speaking as the matriarch was really, really good. But the very, very subtle change in speech patterns as she began to divulge how she actually felt was great. Really, really delicately put together. I thought it was.
I liked how you
quality.
used. Sorry, yeah, I liked how you used all the parts of, well, I'll say super efficiently. Like you established the train, you established the domes, you established the oaths, or the mag train, and the savages, and then flipped all that stuff. So there were no wasted parts. That's hard to establish all that at once, and then be like, and here's the flip side of that. Here's the mirror side of that.
I appreciate that. I think it was something that I was trying to do very consciously. I'd say that there isn't much fat on this story, and it only just came in under 1,500. So it's basically it's exactly what I wanted it to do. I did get some feedback not too long ago that my sort of second acts were a bit compressed, which led to the conclusions also feeling a bit rushed. So I tried to make sure that, as you just said, that everything was correctly set up, and that the sort of drama had been imbued in all the bits before I started to flip things.
I absolutely loved the sequence with I think it was the second husband having the implants removed, because you didn't give a huge amount of detail, obviously because you're super tight on how many words you had to play with, but the things you did say, something about like his mouth getting slat, and he actually wrote down his blind eyes had searched the grey shapes of the crowd. This just very quickly told us, about how there's a clear over-reliance on technology and a sort of self-imposed dependence from it, and it reducing him to a braying animal. That bit on its own. We were talking about 100-word stories before. That was like a 100-word story in the middle. And
agreed. I could see a whole.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say I could see a whole, segment or chapter or multiple chapters about that if this were a novel, about just like what are these. I want to know more about the implants. That I agree with
Timothy. What if it was a screenplay?
I mean, I really love I also love, in terms of screenplays and in terms of movies, dystopias. And I can't help but think of, when you read that, The Hunger Games, and Maze Runner, and all of that genre. Especially because there was a not yet 18-year-old protagonist, right?
Definitely, there's definitely an element of like a sort of Bildungsroman to it. That coming of age thing is definitely in there for sure.
But And it's interesting, if it were a screenplay or I guess a TV series, would it be about the grandmother? Would it start in the past? Or would that be the journey? Is what you described, would that be the journey that we go through in the film itself of someone? In fact, if it were a feature film, I think yes. The answer is it would most likely be about someone whose world was turned upside down when they were in this crash and subjected to what they thought was the worst of humanity. But something else I really liked was we built a society that rejected them, and in doing so, rejected a part of ourselves. I thought that was beautiful.
Mm. Yeah, I think that came. I don't necessarily agree with any of the political ideologies expressed inside the story, but I think that bit is pretty key. I think any time when we hard box out any group, I think we do lose something from human culture by doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was the only bit where I was like, this is definitely me. So I'm glad you like that bit. Oh well, that's lovely feedback, guys, and high praise. But I think we should move on. We've got our guest Timothy, and he's written a story for us.
Okay, well, thank you, Ben and Nico, for this opportunity, and I'm really excited to read this. And well, we'll talk about the process afterwards if you want, but let's do this. Okay, so mine is called "The Boy on the Boat." Normally, cruise ships don't reach their destination empty. Technically, neither does this one, the Princess of the Seas. It's still filled with 1,000 live lobsters, 2 tons of Brussels sprouts, 30,000 eggs, plus grapes and Wagyu beef and ice cream and Captain Morgan dark rum and everything else its passengers needed to get from Miami to Quintana Roo and back again in decadent, liquor-fueled, overfed, kids someone else's responsibility comfort. The rooms are filled with people's bathing suits and rumpled clothing. Some showers still run, now overflowing. Ice machines still create ice, while the various buffets contain hot, rapidly desiccating food. Water slides still flow. Some laundry grows mold in the machines, having sat there since the wash cycle ended. It's been 62 hours since the last recorded communication from the ship. Not that the ship lacks life entirely. There are the live lobster tanks, the small aquarium for the kids, although many of the animals have already eaten one another out of desperation. There are also 3 service dogs, 2 seeing eye dogs and 1 registered support animal, who seem thrilled to see their rescuers, though they must have had a field day with all that hot buffet food. The ship isn't entirely devoid of human life either. There's a boy. His name is Miles Travers. He's 9 years old, and he survived. Quickly, the boy is transferred to a hospital. As soon as he's been checked out comprehensively and confirmed healthy, he's questioned. They already know who he is, that he's from Tampa, that he'd been sailing with his parents, Kyle and Iris Travers. After all, every one of the 2,162 passengers and 533 crew members was carefully documented. As soon as the boy can speak, he doesn't exactly provide tons of information. He's just 9. He'd been taking a nap in the Kid Care Fun Center, in the cool wooden playhouse. Upon waking up and realizing no one was around, kids nor adults, he went searching. When the Coast Guard crew rappels down to the ship from their helicopter, somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico, Miles is in what one might call a savage state. Not starving, if anything, having an entire ship to yourself, from water slides to arcades to the amphitheater, where they'd seen a magic show the first evening, to unlimited bad-for-you sugary cereal, is every kid's dream. But he's bereft, weeping, terrified, understandably. He cannot say what has happened or why. The kind FBI woman interviewing him in the room in Punta Langosta, in Cozumel, tries not to show her frustration. She already knew there would be no answers. Only one fact stood out about Miles, who just finished 5th grade but showed no special promise in his classes, in his drum lessons, nor in his Little League team where he ran away from the ball anytime it approached right field. What stood out was his serious heart infection, myocarditis, at age 2, which necessitated a life-saving heart transplant from a fortunate, for Miles, car crash several states over. The scar down the center of his chest was always a point of ridicule from the other boys, just like any difference at all, perceived or actual. Yet Miles must have done something pretty special to be spared from whatever awful fate had struck the other 2,694. There simply must be something this boy saw, experienced, or did to deserve this. Everything changed after I got home, now parentless, like Cinderella, or Mary Lennox in The Secret Garden, or James and Lily Potter. I was taken in by my aunt on my mother's side and uncle, who already had 2 older kids, just outside Orlando. I can't say the family was anything but nurturing, yet I always got the feeling, and I don't blame them, that they were holding me at arm's length, that they saw me as other, despite being flesh and blood, like a cursed statue or voodoo doll. I've been over it a zillion times with a dozen different therapists from the day I was returned to Florida through now in my mid-30s. But I stopped trying to remember because I remembered nothing, except the first time I entered my bedroom in my family's little cabin on the Princess of the Seas on deck number 7. In my tiny bedroom, there were 4 teenage boys already sitting on my bed. Essentially, I now believe, each was one of the attempts my parents had made to have a child before I came along, all 4 of which ended in miscarriages or stillbirths, stuff I only learned from my aunt much later. I turned around and immediately told my parents about the boys, but hey, kids talk a lot. So I returned to the now empty room and unpacked in a hurry so we could make the magic show. At one point or another, each of the following theories dominated the internet. All have been depicted in the novelizations, the documentaries, the investigative reports, one off-Broadway musical, and 4 different movie versions of what happened to me aboard that ship. 1, I murdered them all. I was a supernatural entity with unreal strength, or part of some top-secret government program, my eyes or fists or brain now unstoppable weapons. Aliens. Always aliens. Like that explains everything or anything. Let me do that again. 2. Aliens. Always aliens. Like that explains everything or anything. 3. A mass suicide event, akin to the People's Temple cult in Jonestown. In this scenario, everyone walked into the sea, mutineer on a plank style, somehow forgetting about me because I was asleep in that playhouse. 4. Solar flares, which do exist but don't generally delete people from existence. 5. Pirates. Real pirates, taking their many hostages to some remote island, which would require a second cruise ship really, and accidentally overlooking just 1 passenger. 6. The Bermuda Triangle, an unknowable force to explain an unknowable event. Also, the Princess of the Seas was over 1,000 miles away from the Bermuda Triangle at the time of the event. But when have actual facts ever changed anyone's mind? 7. Time travel. Everyone else went back or forward in time, but I didn't due to that heart transplant, some sort of DNA or tissue confusion. What about the many documented passengers with cadaverous tendons, donor livers, corneal transplants? So this theory also doesn't hold water, haha. Maybe I should have been a mediocre comedian instead of a moderately successful corporate communications director. I have a few more fun options for you. Perhaps some cruel animal emerged from the sea, one that no one has ever lived to report, with many rows of teeth and eye stalks and tentacles and stingers and suckers and sonar and night vision. It came aboard and slaughtered everyone, but somehow didn't smell me in that playhouse. Or maybe I manifested it all. I disappeared then, like that story Jeff D is 5, which describes a boy with the ability to instantly transport people wherever he wants, including underground. But I'm just a person who survived by accident, a person who wishes my life had more meaning. Lots of people who've experienced far lesser tragedies manage to turn their trauma into a small industry, a YouTube channel, a religion, or at the very least, a 2-book deal and a speaking tour. At least that would mean this was all worth it, the loss of 2,594 people, 2 of them my parents. But survivors aren't chosen. They're lucky, or unlucky, or they just existed. Could my heart have anything to do with it? Why should that matter to aliens, or a cult, or pirates, or time travel principles? It just doesn't seem fair that my parents were taken away from their child, their only child, the one they worked so hard for, after a mere 9 years. Other times, it occurs to me that they, the passengers may not have disappeared, that only I did, that I'm currently lost, that this is where I went. Maybe I fell overboard and drowned. Maybe I died in my sleep from that transplanted heart, which might have had some undiagnosed weakness. Maybe it was damaged in that car crash. Whatever the case, I had no way to know I died, and thus I kept going. Middle school, high school, first kiss, first prom, college, internships, jobs, eventually a family of my own, mortgage, ailments, reunions, grandkids. If anything, that would mean I got really lucky, since I never needed to see my parents die, nor had to witness their grief at seeing me pass. To me, this is the most comforting option, that we leave the world behind, yet blithely keep moving forward, oblivious, working, going to dinner parties, being fired, twisting our ankles, getting bee stings, dealing with clogged toilets, throwing out spoiled food, eating, sleeping, loving, breaking up, working, paying bills, surviving. The prosaicness of life eclipsing the trauma of death. How lovely to just keep going on, to wake up and emerge from that wooden playhouse and see all those people going about their day, your parents annoyed that you were hiding, then to see a show with them in the amphitheater that evening, the waves rocking you to sleep that night. The end.
Oh, what a roller coaster! Loved it.
Good
The
grief.
the whole the haunted ship angle that really strong set of images at the start was so well realized. This idea of the I think there was a bit where the lobsters and stuff they'd been eating each other. Was that
In the aquarium,
in the aquarium?
the
Yes.
aquarium, they've been eating the animals, ate each other. Yes.
Yeah. No, that is. I don't want to say delightful because that's not the right word, but it feels like you were really in the pocket on that bit, and the whole thing was really good. But like that, for me, you really grabbed my attention at that point, and then I was with you through through the POV shift and the time jump.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed it. What an interesting take on survivor guilt. What led you to that sort of outlook? Do you think?
I started, when you gave me the topic, Savage, I was, just thinking of someone who'd been forced to revert to a savage state.
Yeah.
And I think I was thinking of in the forest was my first idea, or, it's somewhat natural, or in a apocalyptic society or post-apocalyptic society. And then I was like, I don't know if I saw an ad for a cruise ship or something, or, what it probably was is watching Below Decks, Below Deck,
Right.
the trashy Bravo show, which I adore. Or, something along those lines where I said, what if it was in a cruise ship, and what would happen if you were left alone? And what if you didn't know what to do because you were a child?
Yeah.
And that's kind of how it started. And then I was, my instinct as a filmmaker is to come up with a really solid answer, a conclusion, an act 3. And in this case, I felt compelled to resist that because I think that, film maybe a little less so, but fiction probably definitely more so. You can kind of leave things more to our interpretation. And so I thought, what if I really go with that and list a bunch of options of what might have happened?
Yeah.
Especially with it being the point of view of the guy that survived, the kid that survived, listing the options. I really thought that was absolutely fascinating because there's the potential there, which I think you realized as in it was realized in your story, for that to have a real bite to it and sort of, it was pirates. Yeah, no, seriously, yeah, no, or maybe a sea creature just climbed out and ate everybody. Yeah, or maybe I'm lying to you. There's a kind of anger simmering behind that listing, I think.
Yeah.
Which I felt that you got across in your performance as well. So absolutely fascinating.
our lead character starts out with really strong Newt from Aliens energy,
Yes, one of my favorites.
and it was really, really interesting to see kind of like an alternate timeline for that character, a character that I was already quite attached to, and see how that could play out. I think you did a. Maybe it's just because you write in the way that you write, but it could be quite easy to feel unsatisfied if that story wasn't written so well as yours was. But I came away not thinking, okay, so what happened, but instead thinking about the character, and I think that's a job well done.
Well, thank you. Those are very kind words from both of you, and that's great because I think that was my intention for you to connect with this person who feels lost and even says like, why can't I even like I wasn't even able to create a YouTube channel about this. I just have a job and I just do my thing and I don't have any answers that you don't have.
Yeah.
The section with his miscarriage brothers being in the room with him, I felt like we potentially skipped over that potentially a little bit too fast. Actually, I would have taken a deep dive into why he's seeing his miscarriage brothers.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because I did have a much longer section, but I had to cut it.
Oh no!
About things he saw throughout his childhood that his parents kind of were like, you need to go to therapy, or they dismissed it, and so things that presumably played into this situation, this whole ship situation on the cruise ship. But I was also interested in that, and it had a lot more about things he's been seeing since he could remember. So I like that you pointed that out.
Yeah, no, that felt like a really solid thread. I really enjoyed the description of what it was like to feel like a little bit of an outcast in the new family. Like, I believe you used the term cursed statue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
That is that little bit of loneliness in a life that's already been essentially damaged from a very early and unavoidable point. Was really heartrending for some reason. It just got me a little bit that even after he's got through everything and he's found a new home and he's still not quite in. People treat him differently still.
exactly. And I think people, if there were a movie version, I think people, would think anything he did was or touched was cursed somehow because he has the stigma attached to him because of what happened.
Yeah. Yes.
It'd be interesting to, obviously you can't do it because it's a story, but to know if, a child who hadn't already been a survivor, how their mentality would have been through it. Because, having a heart transplant at 2, having any kind of chronic condition at a young age, it does change your outlook on certain things. So it would be fascinating to know what, if it happened to someone who was just a 9-year-old who, without a scar on the chest, would they have been different on the other side?
Well, it's amazing that you bring that up because I had also some of the people or other boys he had seen throughout his life in this section that is I couldn't include included future versions of him, some of which presumably had not survived because the heart transplant hadn't come through. So he was able to see not just the I guess you would say the fetuses or babies that never survived that didn't become him, but also the people or corpses that he might have become himself had this heart transplant not worked. And you could even argue that the transplant didn't work, right? That this is just all the projection of this of a ghost of someone who never made it past age 2.
There was definitely that just in that. There's definitely a sort of Sixth Sense vibe to it in that regard, isn't it? Somewhere with a bit of Ghost Ship. I don't know if you've seen that movie. I think it's early 2000s.
I have. Yeah, I was thinking of that too. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think in that there's the only initial survivor is a little girl, isn't it? It's only because she's short or something that she survives. But yeah, that's that was really fun, and I really enjoyed the way that you told it, and I enjoyed the point of view switch as well. That was interesting because there's always something that links the stories together. We always find this. Doesn't
Oh, because you did that too.
Exactly, yeah. And there is nothing in the prompt to suggest that either of us would have done that, but we've both done it. And
Nico, you better come through. The POV
Oh,
sometimes.
switch.
me? I'm not even reading a story after those two. Nope, nope, nope.
Anyway, right. I've waffled long enough. Nico, are you ready?
Nope.
Yeah.
Don't wanna.
Let's hear it. Let's hear it.
No, no, sir.
Outro music plays instead. Up you go.
Go on then. Savage. Borin listened intently to the sound of heavy footfalls and the accompanying crunching noises. Those soothing rhythmic plods reminded him of something. Some familiarity tickled at the back of his brain. Tendrils of thought, heavy with fatigue, reached for a memory, tucked away in some dusty corner of Borin's mind. His father's face swam into view. The coarse, black bristles, long since grey, then white as winter's snow, lined his jaw, and were matted with soot and dirt. His head, shorn bald by a dagger's razor edge, glinted with the sweat of hard labour. A solitary drop ran a clear streak through the filth on his face, and his tongue subconsciously flicked, like some great lizard, to catch the drop. His mind's thirst must be great, even if he had taught himself to ignore it. Borin's head swam. He remembered more than he thought. Not that he ever thought about remembering. He reckoned, for a moment, that he'd probably forgotten more than he would ever learn, and perhaps knowledge was futile. A desperate scrabble to be the most intelligent. A fight that was often solved with blades instead of wits anyway. The thought vanished as quickly as it had come. It was not in Borin's nature to think such things. If he'd had his way, he probably wouldn't have thought anything beyond where he was able to piss, and enough counting to measure coins for an evening of company as they stopped in towns along their march. Even thinking about counting was tiring. And so, he let his thoughts settle back into memory. He and his father had walked together, his young legs on the verge of a run to keep up with father's powerful strides. Each one of those footfalls brought with it that crunch. 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 Borin's feet bringing alongside it the patter of tiny noises, like raindrops to the thunderclaps of his father's stride. He drank in the scenery of his recollection. He didn't recall doing so at the time. He had been as unobservant as a child as he was now in adulthood. But he looked, and he saw familiar sights. The dull grey mounds of broken stone. The men, each cut from the same ragged cloth as his father. Their thick arms swinging heavy tools of iron, sweating and grunting in the thin light of daybreak. Who knew if these men were just beginning to dig, or, like his father, just finishing? The quarry never slept. It couldn't. Without the constant supply of stone and precious metals, the town would die, and so would everyone in it. Gravel sound had been Borin's favourite. Not so much his feet shuffling through it, causing that cascade of tiny pebbles to fly away from him, but his father's purposeful stride. It made the best noise of all, like a marching army. Borin closed his eyes. He could just see those thousands of men marching against some unknown and terrible foe. Perhaps even a dragon. Borin stopped. His father's footfalls had stopped, and a great sigh, like a wounded bear's final exhalation, escaped him. Borin turned. His eyes opened again and looked at the mountain of a man that had sired him. From his thick black beard to his patched leather boots, he was everything Borin wanted to grow up to be. Strong, tall, proud, and, until a moment ago, always smiling. Borin, come here. His father's booming voice was soft, and their eyes met. Father's gaze penetrated deeply into the young man's soul. As he stepped closer, his father lowered himself, dropping to sit on his own feet, balancing his enormous weight on the toes alone. He placed a hand on Boren's shoulder. In spite of the man's size, the movement was gentle. It landed delicate as a bird, so at odds with the blows being delivered to stone all around them that even Boren took note. "Yes, Dad?" "You're 10 years gone, ain't you, boy? It's a bloody long time, but no time at all, neither." His eyes were filled with a wistful look, something Boren had never seen. They snapped back to meet his. "You promised me something, boy." "Anything, Dad?" Boren did not hesitate, and meant the words. "Do not work in this quarry, boy. You're my pride and joy, and you're meant for better than this. There's a big world outside this town, and you are going to see it. Be a great man's son. Better than me, at least." "Dad?" But his father's eyes had glazed over, and he stood again at his massive height. His stride restarted, as strong and fast as if it had never ceased, and dutifully, Boren fell in step again, hurrying in the wake of his father. Boren found a tear rolling out of his eyes, and opened them to a world so far away from the quarry that had eaten his father's greatest years. The sky above reflected in them a heady purple. Beautiful. Something he wouldn't consider normally, but in light of the flashback, he decided now was the right time to enjoy the world. The methodical thud and crunch of the footsteps continued, and it took Boren a moment to realise they weren't being generated in his head. With a great deal of effort, he tilted his chin and looked down across his own prone body. There was a gaping hole where he distinctly remembered his chest having been. He'd liked his chest. It had just got properly hairy, like Dad's. He'd loved the feel of fingers in that hair. It made him feel like a proper man. He smiled, which hurt, and a spurt of fresh claret fountained from the wound. He let his head fall back and loll to the side. The scene that met his eyes seemed a million miles away. The carnage was unreal. Acres of bodies, each broken and bent until they bore no semblance to their original forms. These men had been brothers, comrades, fellow soldiers. Boren had tried so hard to keep that promise to his father. He'd enlisted, then he'd marched across a great deal of the continent. He'd see it all for Dad. Perhaps it was his lack of imagination, but he'd never countenanced seeing this. The crunch and thud stopped, and Boren noticed that he was shrouded in darkness. He strained to turn his head the other way. So simple a task felt impossible, as he felt pain near everywhere, save the worrying lack of pain where he thought some ought to be. Maybe the shadow had come to save him. Together they would get word back to the civilized world that something had come. Some new evil ready to take the kingdoms of man and feast on their still beating hearts. With a thud his head fell, and he saw the owner of the shadow. A beast, standing like a man but tall. Far too tall. Even father would have been dwarfed by it. The stink of southern swampland exuded from the thing, stronger even than the reek of piss and blood that poisoned the air. Its green flesh wrapped over impossibly bulging musculature. In dozens of places rusted rings of metal punctured the great knots of flesh. Its yellowing teeth extended into great pointed tusks. Boren had fought and killed in many places, and truth told aided in ending the lives of many men. And this was no man. It was inhuman. It looked into his eyes, its own dark, piggy pupils showing no sign of emotion. Its face wrinkled, and the stubby snout drank in the smell of Boren's blood. Boren opened his mouth to speak, and the orc swung its cruel weapon down. A hunk of stone lashed crudely to a dead branch. Boren's head burst in a cascade of gore. Those half-remembered scenes of death and broken stone sprayed across the remnants of Lars. The orc shouldered the weapon, dripping with what was once Boren, and began to walk away. Crunch. Crunch. Its heavy footfall shattered bones with every stride. Crunch. Crunch. Crunch.
Oh, we got so close to a POV shift at the end there. Oh,
I was so, yes, we were so close, but that was amazing.
There was a chest wound.
It's only a chest wound. I went through so many, or it's only a flesh wound. I went through so many emotions listening to that. It was really great.
Oh, I'm glad. I hope they were all positive emotions.
Your delivery was really excellent, embodying the father and the son and the narrator. It was really evocative.
I'd agree
Thank
with
you.
that for sure. I even spotted a new accent that you haven't used before, which is the voice of the child. I thought that was very well realized to do a kid's version of that accent. It was very good.
I mean, one thing I really appreciate about this was I felt that I was it really takes its time with the character.
Yeah.
And the world and the world is still, I was still discovering new things about the world in the very last paragraph, because I was like, wait, he killed people? Wait, there are orcs around? Because it could be father-son, it could be post-apocalyptic, it could be it turned out to be fantastical, but I think there are elements of many genres that you were able to fuse together in a beautiful way.
I think,
was that your intention?
So what I wanted really was to give all that setup and kind of potential, and it for not only the man Boren, but for the world, and all of that to be snatched by the cruelty of his death. I think there's a fun kind of parallel to be drawn there, because I always want to do these kind of big fantasy things for the podcast, but with the word count, it is really difficult to get it in. So I think I definitely took a risk taking as much time with setup and background as I did, but I think making the kind of effort of the story be to have all that history in a man, and then it just not matter because his head got crushed.
But you did all the really great work setting it up. I really cared about this character and was annoyed that he gets his head crunched. But I wonder if you thought this too, Ben. I thought maybe he was, because of the thoughts, because we're so deep inside his thoughts, it evokes that so much. I wondered if he was inhuman somehow himself, at least at the beginning, like if he's a robot or if he's an alien or if he's some sort of entity that we don't understand yet, which I thought that really made it gripping for me. I don't know if that was your intention.
I think there was definitely a really strong self-awareness that he was inside his own thoughts, and I can definitely see how you got there. I think maybe potentially not a clarifying line, but like another little bit of a flavorful sort of hook line would be somewhere near the start, to be like, just talk about the kind of clarity that you get in these moments without clarifying what the actual moment is.
Mm-hmm.
And later on, then we find out that it's his dying moments. That's why he's so in his head. That's why he's thinking about his father. That, I don't know. It could be a small tweak, and then potentially you're sort of more connected to the character through the whole thing, or maybe that's too much. I don't know. Maybe that's too on the nose. But I definitely really enjoyed it. I enjoyed how you drilled down into this moment and the waste of it.
Yeah.
I think that's not something you normally get in a story that has big ass orcs plodding around. And
Yeah.
it felt like more like low fantasy, sort of grim dark than it did the more traditional kind of fantasy that you would find in Orkin, I think. All in all, fully enjoyed it. Really liked the horrible, depressive swing of it being a battlefield and there's 1,000 other corpses like him littered around. It's
and even how he doesn't even fully seem to realize that he is the one who is dying. That was just, oh man, that's just so tragic and also soothing in a certain way.
Yeah, I think the simplicity of the man is kind of what makes the character work.
Yes.
Because if he's become introspective without even really understanding what introspection is. A man who's not really afforded thought beyond well, Dad said I need to see the world, and this is the simplest way to do it, is to have someone pay me to walk all over it, fighting people.
Killing people, yeah.
Yeah.
But we didn't really learn about that he's killed all these people until the very last page or so, if I'm not mistaken.
I got the impression that he was on the losing side of a battle, and all those people were his sort of comrades who had all died.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yes, in this battle, yeah.
Right, yeah. I think there's definitely something in there with the this idea of like parents giving their kids too large an ambition to try and fulfill because they have failed to do anything with their lives. That kind of vicariousness that you find in fairly poor parenting, and probably don't look for a particularly good parental role model in the situation that he found himself in. But at the same time, like this being the interpretation of you'll do big things and you'll go places is just it just speaks to the quality of the world building. So I think that's a good thing.
And I just because it could have gone so many different directions. Of course, you had planned it and planted it in the beginning, which I didn't realize. But I just love that how he looks up to his father, and his father's this massive presence in his imagination or in his memory, and that's a really good. You evoked, a son and father relationship really well, even if we had no idea it was going in that direction.
Yeah. That was very complimentary from both of you, so thank you.
So much. All three.
I mean, something else I really loved is how different the similarities and how utterly different these are and taking place in completely different worlds.
Yes.
High fantasy, high sci-fi, and whatever mine is.
All the above, technically.
I think yours would be like a potentially horror, maybe the main genre.
Maybe some supernatural, some horror, paranormal, but I was maybe somewhere in between the two of you guys.
Yeah.
So you're saying it was orcs got on the cruise ship, and they put all the passengers on the mag train, apart from... Oh, it makes sense now.
I think there is potential for us to fuse all these into one mashup book, for sure.
I feel like it would be... We wouldn't have to give anybody any drugs or anything. We could just get them to read it and just trip with it.
Completely.
Wait, so the matriarch was living with orcs? No. Look, you're not getting this at all.
Did you even read this? Did you even concentrate?
Top notch. So, where should people follow you for updates on your work, Timothy?
Well, thank you for asking. They can follow me on Instagram. Is one place I post a lot. Timothy Michael Cooper is my handle. It's pretty easy to remember because that is also my name. And you can, as I mentioned before, you can go to 365 Short Stories, 365shortstories.com. And I'm still doing a story. There's still over 100 left for the rest of 2023. So And they're all, something we didn't even talk about or get to talk about because we were hearing these amazing stories from you guys, is that each story is illustrated using AI, and I can discuss that more, and I'm happy to. And that's been a really interesting process. And I'm gonna give just 2 more URLs. One is if you want to support writers and actors on strike, which my union, the Writers Guild, is currently in, along with SAG-AFTRA here in the US. You can go to entertainmentcommunity.org, and they give money to people who are in need or hurting because of the strikes. And finally, if you like speculative fiction, if you like supporting independent storytelling and want to support my sci-fi comedy that's coming up, it's a short film I'm making, you can go to needfilm.com, and that's need as in dough, so KNEADFILM.com, needfilm.com, and find out more there.
Top notch. Well, you heard him, folks. Hit it up.
Come back next week and hear more.
Definitely, because we are going into this. Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For magnificent beardery, let's cast the Chinicus folliculale spell on Gary Laird. For rich ginger tones on the scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La, How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?